and welcome to the module. And we have bought a Commodore 16. Ooh. It's very exciting. I'm sure at some point I've said, I'm not going to drop it. I'm sure at some point I've said that this was the only computer I ever sold. So it's kind of a big deal that I had it in the 80s. Sold it to get the C64, which was a good choice because the C64 was an awesome games machine, and I played on that for years and years and years. But obviously, I keep my computers. I don't sell them. So it is a special moment to get this back. I mean, I think a lot of the things we're going to buy, we're going to sort of fix up and sell on. That's what we're thinking. But I think maybe this one, I want to keep this because it's the C16. It's awesome. However, I did realise there was also the deck. I had a deck Rainbow, which, although it's kind of a PC, and obviously I've got rid of PCs, they don't count because they're boring. It was a special. It wasn't PC compatible. It had its own format of discs, and it had a 286 and a Z80 CoPro. Isn't that weird? And what it was, I think people have kind of forgotten. The PC was crap. Well, no, the PC wasn't crap. The PC was useful for business, but for moving things around the screen, it was hopeless. So it was a kid's home computer for games and all that stuff. It was just, and that was all about basically because of ISA being so bloody slow. Until PCI came out, PC sucked. So that Z80 did smooth scrolling. So you typed DIR and it came down the screen really smoothly. But anyway, that was an aside. We've got a Commodore 16. And for those who don't know, it's not the precursor to the Commodore 64. It went VIC-20 in 1980, after the PET in 77, maybe? Don't know. And the C64 in 82. You go back and you think 82 C64, bloody hell! But it was $695 in 82. It was the high-end games machine. So obviously the other thing that was happening was with Sinclair, particularly in the UK, in maybe Europe. Those very, very cheap computers were hugely successful. Less so in the US, which is interesting. And a lot of businesses tried to grab onto the tail of that and do a cheaper machine, and for whatever reason weren't able to do it. So there's, the Electron is another one. That was a disaster for Acorn. But basically, it was basically the end of Acorn as in terms of what we know as Acorn. Although thankfully they carried on being owned by Olivetti. But yeah, I mean, Jack Tramiel, who was the CEO, king, leader of Commodore Tramiel. This wasn't his plan. He wanted really low-end business computers. He realised that they weren't in that field, and what I think similar to the Sinclair thing, but where the Sinclair thing really was for enthusiasts. It was for electronics people really. That was it was just about a computer, and then the Spectrum just added a bit on, and it was whatever it was. But I think a really cheap business computer was such a good idea. The QL tried to do it as well, and that failed as well. And so he came up with this series of computers, the 116, the 264, and I think the 364 as well. There's a picture of him holding a 364. So you had the 116 had a rubber keyboard. It was a bit like a Spectrum, but looked kind of like a Commodore Plus 4. And now to me, I mean, Commodore fans may disagree with this, but to me, one, it looks far better than this ridiculous bread bin thing. I mean, now in Retroland, something weird with the bread bin shape is brilliant, but it looks great, and it's a bit smaller. I don't know. This is quite a bit bigger than the Plus 4. I think the Plus 4 is about up to there, something like that. It's probably about the same height. And that was 64K. But the original 264 was a slightly different proposition. The idea was to make them cheap. They needed to be cheap. C64 by 84 was 300 quid. And $300. I think it was 300 quid here and $300 in the US, which is like half the price it started at. But obviously the C64 was huge by this point. But then Jack Tramiel fell out with the board, whatever, those people, and left for Atari deliberately because he wanted to get them back, kind of thing, and went on to develop the Jackintosh, the ST. And then once he left, it's like this is the thing with the story of Commodore. It's like nobody knew what they were doing, and that they've got the tech people must have been some of the best tech people in the world. They had these wonderful things. They had, the C64, I think, particularly. You think what they got out of it in the end, that's actually a fantastic bit of design, And so what they did, they thought, well, the Commodore 64, that's selling a lot. So this computer that's been developed by the techie people, let's make it look like a Commodore 64, stick 16K on it, and then we'll release the original case that was planned, that's the 264, as the Commodore Plus 4, and we'll put this, word processor and spreadsheet and database and something, 4 things, that's why it's a Plus 4, built into the ROM. And on paper, that's a good idea. Mm-hmm. Cheap business computers got everything built in. Supposedly the software's crap. I don't know whether the software is crap. The software was chosen by the marketing people, not the techie people. But really, I think the problem really was that it didn't have an 80-column mode. So that which we'll see when we put it on, 30-column, is it 32-column, whatever it is. If you want to do spreadsheets particularly, but also word processing, it's kind of rubbish, isn't it? You need 80-column. And it only had 64K, and it was 300 quid. It was the same price as the C64. So there's just no logic in. I mean, it's got a better keyboard than a C64, but and so because they released both machines, the games had to be compatible with the C16. So all the games are 12K, 10K, things like that. And obviously, with that amount of memory, you can't do anything. And it, in some ways, this is more powerful than the C64. You've got 121 colours. I think it's because there's like 7 somethings, I don't know, characters or transparencies, not transparent, something. And you've got 1.79 megahertz. So the big drag on the C64, remember, is the speed, the 1 megahertz. If you're not, you've got to be using the hardware sprites and the hardware scrolling in the C64. If you're not, it's not going to do anything. That's the thing about the C64. So it means potentially you've got a better machine, and if you've got more memory, so on the Commodore Plus 4, the 64K version, it's got fantastic graphics, much better than the C64. But only with 16K, you completely scuppered, And this came out at 150 quid, more than the Spectrum. So in this country anyway, you'd have to, unless you're like a Commodore fan, you'd have to be mad. And then it dropped to 50 quid. And I assume that's where all these come from, because they're all around. They don't seem to be worth anything. They're worth slightly less than that now. When it was dropped to 50 quid. 50 quid, yeah, brilliant. But it should have been 99.99. It's like they couldn't handle the pricing. It should have been 32K at 100 quid. And the Plus 4 probably should have been 128K with an 80-column text mode. Then you could justify it being 300 quid. But obviously, ultimately, the Commodore 16, it's a C64 without the good bits. What's good about the C64? It's got loads of RAM. It's got hardware sprites. It's got hardware scrolling. It's got awesome sound. That's what's been taken out of here. And yeah, I say that. But having actually used it, and hopefully as we'll see when you watch us playing on it, it's come out better than I thought. I thought it was just going to be crap, but a lot of it seems to be just bad programming. I suspect the programmers who were working on the C64 also did the C16 version, and they're used to using hardware sprites. So nothing wrong with using software sprites if you've got a fast enough processor. So yeah, I'm pleasantly surprised by it. But before we do that, I think we should do this first before we try and plug it in and check it works. Let's see if we can break it by opening it up.
Ooh, let's see what's inside. Crazy joystick thing. Why did they do that, Kev?
If you have, they wanted to sell their own joysticks, didn't they? If you haven't got that, it's useless. It's a useless computer.
Right then.